from the vault. High atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Talking Catholic. I'm Jen Morrow, and with me, as always, is Mike Walsh. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
That's good. We took the show on the road today.
We did.
We literally crossed the street and came over to the other building of the Chancery office of the Diocese of Camden.
I called it a field trip. Mike said, "Do you want to go across the street?" I said, "Yes, field trip."
Well, we have a unique situation in the I don't know if it's unique actually because I only am familiar with this diocese, but as far as I know, it's a unique situation that our diocese is split between two administrative offices that are on either side. Well, three administrative offices, but I don't count the one down on the other side of town. But yeah, so we have a street going right down the center of Camden that separates the two of us, and I have to admit, I don't come over here unless I have to. Well,
what?
It's because when you come over there, when it starts talking to you, and we've talked about this before, I'm an introvert, and I got to come up with small talk, and it's a whole thing. So only when there's a meeting do I come over here. But today we actually volunteered to record the podcast over here.
And we crossed the street.
Yeah.
I like it over here. I always like to see, I don't get to see everybody often, so I like to come over, visit. Not that I have a lot of time to do that, but...
And you see... Okay.
Yeah, okay, my boss is looking at me like, what do you mean? What do you have all this free time? And you just told me how busy you are. Whoops.
Don't worry, you're in good company because all of the staff of the communications department of the Diocese of Camden is always bugging me about, Mike, when can we move over to the other building? And I say, I've never been here. I started with the other... I mean, I've been here, but when I came to the diocese, we were already over in the other building. And I love it over there because I'm sort of sequestered away from everything, all the craziness that happens in the diocese. I'm tucked away in my little corner. I don't find out about anything going on until something wrong happens, and it's the best.
Right.
It's like nobody comes up and chit chats with me. And as you well know, I have this reputation of being unpleasant, so people don't want to go there unless they have to. It's a great opportunity to be all the way over there, but I am the only person on the communications department that feels that way.
And you do have the vault, so you wouldn't want to leave the vault.
I don't want to leave the vault.
Right.
I love the vault. There's some people I'd like to lock in the vault.
Oh, well, that's a different podcast.
Anyway, so we're having a nice conversation with a very special guest. I think it's his second or third time on the podcast. I think it's his third time on the podcast. But we'll get to him in a second. But we did want to let people know that 'tis the season for graduations all across the state of New Jersey and country, I would assume. And we in the Diocese of Camden will be featuring, I think, all of them next week, right, in the Catholic Star-Herald?
Yes, we'll have all the graduations, multiple photos, some speeches, and coverage of Bishop's homily at all the graduations. And you don't have to wait for the paper, which will be out on June 10th, because we're covering them live as well online. And we already have building photo galleries where there's hundreds of photos, so go on to CatholicStarHerald.org and take a look. Yeah,
that'll be nice. We haven't really promoted that much on the podcast, but we should. That we've added that photo gallery feature to the Star Herald's website, CatholicStarHerald.org. So now when we have these major events, you can go on, and if you see a photograph you like, check it out. And I think we're going to make them available for purchase as soon as we figure that out.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Which is not atypical. There's a lot of publications that do that. Mm-hmm. But it's one thing that, as a photographer myself, has always bummed me out that I go to an event, I shoot 400 photographs. Right. We use 3 in the newspaper, maybe as many as 20 on social media, but then the rest are just left in the archives. So now when we have a major event, go and see if you can find yourself in the crowd.
That's actually, I think that's fun to see, especially for graduations, because you can see if your family's there or your loved ones or your friends, see them getting their diploma.
Yep. And I can't promise that we'll shoot every graduate as they're coming off. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you right now, we're not. But you never know. We might.
Yeah. Well, plus when you're looking at the crowd shots, I mean, after a while, you see different faces in every photo.
And as you know, I love crowd shots. I'm all about showing the enormity of the people. Unlike all the other photographers that we work with, and I've ever worked with in my entire life, who like to really tighten up on a photo, which I do too, and get a nice, that person's response to whatever's going on. Mm-hmm. I love a good crowd shot because people like to see themselves in the crowd. So
they do, but I'll tell you what some of my favorite up close photos is ordinations. Yes. The priestly ordinations is when you can get some really, if the photographer's gotten some close-up shots of like when the priest is have the laying of hands or laying prostrate. They're beautiful. Those are some of my favorite moments. And we have ordination
that's right,
photo galleries, too.
That's right. Don't forget the ordinations were recently, too. Matter of fact, was it the Logan Nilsson one that we ran where he looked like he was getting emotional?
Yes.
Yeah, that was nice. He was probably just coughing, but he looked like he was getting emotional. So.
Yes, I'm sure that's what he's doing. He's coughing. It's one of the most important moments of his life.
You never know. It was dry in there. There's a lot of people. It could be that. It's allergies. Anyway. So please, by all means, check out the Catholic Star Herald website for all of your Catholic news and photos of major events.
Yeah. And
I will be shooting Paul VI High School. So if I actually know any of the graduates, I can guarantee you I'm going to be taking their photographs. That's the one little side bet side deal of shooting at some of these high schools is I know some of the kids and some of the parents and stuff like that. And I know that there's at least 3 parents that I'm friends with. If I don't take a picture of their kid, they know where I live.
There'll be words.
So I will make sure I get that done, Mr. Henry.
That's outstanding. That was a good shout out.
So anyway, there is actually, as fun as all the graduations are, there is one major event coming up soon, particularly in the Diocese of Camden, but all around the United States, called the Eucharistic Revival. We've talked about it a little bit on the podcast. We wanted to have a podcast that really kind of explained it, because I think just now news is really starting to trickle out. You actually had a great article in the last edition of the Star Herald with our guest today. But we want to make sure that people are getting the full idea of why this entity exists. And we're going to talk a little bit about the kickoff event in the Diocese of Camden, which will be a Eucharistic procession.
I'm very excited about this event.
Yeah, me too. So, who do we have with us today?
We have Father Robert Hughes, our Vicar General of the Diocese of Camden and the moderator of the curia. Thank you, Father, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, I've had the pleasure, and that wasn't in air quotes, of being on a lot of committee meetings with Father Hughes to discuss the Eucharistic Revival and what we're planning for it. I have to tell you that Father has done an outstanding job. I feel like almost the committee isn't necessary because you've come up with so many great ideas for the next year that we feel superfluous. But you've given us a lot of marching orders. But I guess the first question is, what is the Eucharistic Revival and why is it happening?
Well, the Eucharistic Revival is a 3-year experience that the Church in the United States will undergo at the request of the bishops to re-emphasize the importance of the Eucharist, to reinvigorate people's faith in the Eucharist, and to hopefully evangelize about what we believe.
Now, when you say bishops, this is you said U.S. bishops. This is
Correct.
A United States initiative.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, many people are aware that a survey was done not long ago that indicated that there are only 30% of people who believe in the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and that others believe that what we do on Sunday is symbolic. Mm-hmm. And so the bishops want to correct that understanding and re-emphasize what the true teaching of the Church is regarding the Eucharist.
So it's a national revival that I believe is 2 or 3 years long?
Yeah, it's the first year of the revival begins on June 19th of this year, which is the Feast of Corpus Christi, and that is an opportunity for dioceses to begin the process of providing resources, information, and opportunities for people to understand the Eucharist, celebrate the Eucharist, and learn more about it. Mm-hmm. In June of 2023, on, I believe it's June 10th, is the Feast of Corpus Christi that year. The focus will turn to parishes, so the parishes will more intimately connect their people to the Eucharist, using some of the resources that the diocese has already outlined, or some of the patterns that the diocese has prepared, but also whatever they creatively can come up with on their own. Mm-hmm. To connect people to the Eucharist. And then in 2024, the major event of 2024, the bishops of the United States are hosting a Eucharistic Congress. It's a national Eucharistic Congress, not international. Philadelphia in 1976 held an international Eucharistic Congress. I believe Denver had a Eucharistic Congress with surrounding the visit of the Pope for World Youth Day. But this will be a National Eucharistic Congress taking place in Indianapolis in the football stadium there and they expect about 66,000 people or so from across the country to come for a several-day event to focus on, again, the teaching of the Church, the faith of the Church, and to experience the Eucharist.
So, before we get too far into what we're going to be doing as part of the revival and the procession that's going up soon, do you have any idea as to why? Is it unusual in the Catholic faith? Is this surprising that so many people don't understand the Eucharist? Or is that maybe its nature is that nobody understands it, and therefore people found it easier to kind of not consider it the body and blood?
I don't think anybody intentionally doesn't understand it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that, there is one aspect of it. We say it's a mystery. Mm-hmm. So obviously sometimes we write off mysteries as something that we don't need to try to understand. So there may be some of that at play. I think more, and more really, the experience over the last 50 years has been an impoverished sense of catechesis. We haven't catechized well for several generations, and at the same time, the practice of the faith has diminished, in the United States and in other parts of the world, and so less people connected to the Eucharist mean less people truly understand it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you might almost be able to say that we talk a lot about this subset of the United States, the nuns, the people of no faith whatsoever. Do you feel that these two are a little bit tied together? Maybe that as people are leaving the faith, the people who stay in the faith are just not focused on their faith enough?
I think the people who practice on Sundays regularly, for the most part, understand their faith. Obviously we can always grow in our faith and understand it more deeply. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I don't think anybody approaching communion on Sunday comes up not believing that it's that somehow it's connected to Jesus.
Right.
When they say that they think it's symbolic, they truly believe that somehow they're making access to Jesus, but they may not really believe that it is Jesus. Mm-hmm. And the Church's teaching is that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. Yeah. It's not a symbol.
Yeah.
So that Jesus made the promise to us, at the Last Supper, this is my body, this is my blood, and that we are to do that in remembrance of him, and to make sure that we celebrate faithfully, what Jesus handed on to us.
Yeah.
And, to be fair, that's not a new concept, the idea that to grasp that this is really the body and blood. I mean, even in the Gospels, and I think it's in the Gospel of John, there's discussion where Jesus says, this is my flesh and this is my blood, and some people are like, okay, this is weird, and they kind of bail, right? Like, yeah, mm-hmm. There's biblical reference that it hasn't been understood.
Correct. That the early followers of Jesus, or those who were attempting to follow him, they had they were Jewish, so they had a very, very keen sense of what the Old Testament scriptures speak about, and there are clear prohibitions in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Leviticus, that remind the Jewish people that blood is sacred, it belongs to God, and it should not be touched, and certainly not eaten or consumed in any way. So the idea that Jesus would offer his flesh and blood just made no sense to them whatsoever. They couldn't grasp it, mm-hmm. because it was so far removed from their ordinary experience. They didn't do anything with blood. Mm-hmm. And even to this day, if you go to Israel, there are units or squads that belong to the fire department and the EMTs that are, that have to be mindful when somebody gets injured, how to deal with the blood. And obviously the health and well-being of the person is important, so they deal with that. But then other people come in afterwards and they meticulously absorb the blood, from the accident scene or whatever it is, and properly dispose of that, because they still reverence greatly the significance of blood.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And here I am throwing away my Band-Aids. All right. Sorry, I couldn't resist. We talk about the Eucharist a lot with respect to the Catholic Church, and we've talked about how, and previous podcasts, we've talked about how other faiths have other ways of representing, consubstantiation versus transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is what the Catholic Church believes. The difference between us and, say, Protestants, that difference between us and Protestants regarding the Eucharist is really central to our faith as a church, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really one of those very important things that define us. Not the only thing, but one of the very important things that define us and really separates us from other religions, other Christian faiths. Do you get the impression that Catholics have an understanding of that, of the notion of transubstantiation versus consubstantiation?
Yeah, those are big words that...
They're my favorite words. I love those words.
Yeah. They're big words and they're important words, but the reality is that sometimes makes it harder for people to understand what we're even talking about. Yeah. That the substance of bread and wine, become the body and blood of Christ, is what transubstantiation means, and so we truly believe that this is the body, this is the blood of Christ under the form of bread and wine. And so it does distinguish us from other Christians. They're clearly the Orthodox Church and the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church. They believe what we believe about the Eucharist. But the mainline Protestants and evangelical Protestants have more of a sense that this is a symbol of what Jesus did. And the difference is that we believe as Catholics that every time the Mass is celebrated, that, for lack of a better way of explaining it, a window is open to the event of Calvary. We do not believe that the sacrifice of Christ is repeated every time we celebrate the Mass. There's no repetition. Jesus, offered his life, offered his body and his blood once and for all, on Calvary. So the Mass gives us access to that event. And that's what's so beautiful about the Mass, and what's so enriching about it, that the very graces that were given by the fact that Jesus offered his life on the cross are made available to us through the celebration of the Mass and the sacraments.
Wow. As part of our coverage of the Eucharistic Revival, we're going to be doing stories on first communicants who have received and sort of like what their perspective is, particularly the little second graders, because they have such a wide-eyed vision of what's going on and what they're receiving. But one of the conversations that Jen and I have had, and I think you and I have had, was also talking to some of our recently ordained and what that feeling must be like for them. And we're going to do those stories down the line. But now, since we have you here, I'm curious, after your ordination, you're finally able to celebrate the Mass fully, and it's time for you to celebrate, the liturgy of the Eucharist. What did that mean to you, like the first time you did it?
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Really?
For so many years before you're ordained a priest, you're on the other side of the table in a sense, and so you're receiving what you truly believe has become which we believe is the body and blood of Christ, and then when you have the responsibility of celebrating the Mass, it's overwhelming. But I told the guys that were being ordained this year at an event that we had for them a few days before the ordination, that one of the beautiful things about the way that we celebrate Mass today, is that when you are in a parish and you're a priest, associate pastor, or a pastor, you get to know the people who come to church, right? And so when you're celebrating Mass, you have a very, very unique position because you know the stories of so many people who are seated before you, and the people sitting next to them in their own family may not know those stories. Wow. So the person who's just been diagnosed with cancer, or the person whose child isn't going to church anymore and they're very upset about that, and the story of the person who just lost their parent, and countless other stories. And when you celebrate the Mass and you hold the Eucharist before them, we see through the Eucharist these people that are gathered there, and they're gathered there because they need what Jesus provides to them in giving himself to them, and so the remedy, the healing that comes through the Eucharist is powerful. And so dealing with those circumstances and those issues, is something that we pray for at that moment. Right. That the grace of God will come through the Blessed Sacrament, through the body and blood of Christ, to the people that are here to celebrate with us the Eucharist. And so it's a very, very unique position, I think, and really in the person of the priest draws the needs and the wants and the expectations that people have, and does what a priest does. We offer them to God on behalf of the people. And and then amazingly, through the power of God, the Lord gives himself to us so that the very needs that we came in with begin to be satisfied. May take many, many masses for them to be satisfied. May take a lifetime. But we believe that over the course of time, the grace that's received in the Eucharist has a profound effect in our lives, helps us to become more and more Christ-like, and it's just a beautiful experience. So
I'm so glad you shared that with us. Good question, Mike, because that was just beautiful. Like as the the parishioner on the other end of that, I brings a memory that when I was going through something and I wasn't able to get to Mass in a couple of weeks just to because of what was going on. And when I finally got back to Mass, my pastor knew what was happening. And when I came up to take the Eucharist, he held it before me and he said my name, the body of Christ, Jennifer. And it was like Jesus saying that. And it almost made me cry because I knew I'd been away for a while. I was going through something difficult and he knew. Right. So that just falls in line with what you're talking about. And it's just like a relationship.
And that I think is what's so disheartening about people who choose to stay away from the Eucharist. Right. It's when we're struggling with our faith. It's when we're struggling with whatever is going on in our lives. It's when we think we don't deserve to go that we need to be there. Right. Oh, wow. And that's the thing. That's what is so, like I said, disheartening, that people stay away and then they stay away because something happened. Things do happen, in the life of the church, and somebody gets offended at something that's said, or they don't like the way the music is done at a particular Mass or what have you. So they choose not to go. And then after a while, it becomes a habit, and they stop going. And it's a shame because, again, the graces that are available in the celebration of the Eucharist and the reception of the Eucharist are so very, very important and essential to our salvation. So that's, like I said, I always tell people, when you don't want to go, that's the day that the Lord is calling you to go. And if you do go, I guarantee you something will happen, that changes you, because you're coming disposed to have God do something, and that makes a huge difference. I mean, whenever we're willing to cooperate with somebody, things advance more readily. And so it's the same thing with God, that if we're willing to cooperate with his grace, amazing things can happen in our lives, and we can change. The Psalms tell us, that though your sins be scarlet, they can be as white as snow. So the reality is, what God can do, we can't do. And unfortunately, I think we live in a time where we don't feel the need for a savior, because we think we can save ourselves. And we can't. Right. If we could, Jesus would never have had to come to begin with.
Right.
And so that's the difficult thing. Where, especially Americans, as American culture is, I have to be independent. I have to do it myself. I can take care of myself. And all those things are wonderful characteristics that make us a wonderful people. But when it comes to faith, we need more. And there's nothing wrong with relying on God and our faith and what God can do in our lives.
And I feel like when you were talking about you might not be going up to receive the Eucharist because you don't feel worthy, like I feel like that can become a vicious circle. If you go every time and say, well, I'm still not worthy, but you're denying Christ the opportunity to work within you a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, if we're conscious of serious sin,
Sure.
we're supposed to go to confession and make a veil of that.
Right.
The same thing in the sacrament of penance. They're connected. The Eucharist and penance are connected because, again, it's a healing remedy, for us to recognize that we need to change our lives, that we want to change our lives, that the grace that comes in the sacrament of penance, helps us. But at every Mass, we also do that. And every Mass begins with a penitential rite, in which we ask the Lord's mercy upon us, and ask forgiveness of our sins, and even in the Eucharistic prayer, it reminds us the Eucharist is there to forgive sins, and to bring us healing. So, we have to be careful. I mean, obviously, again, if we're aware of serious sin, we should go to confession. But, sometimes we become too scrupulous as to whether we're worthy or not, and Jesus wants to come to us.
Right.
In every circumstance in the Scriptures, no matter how sinful somebody was, he went to them. He didn't tell them to fix their lives first and then go to them. He went to them, and then by his loving presence and the grace that he bestowed, encouraged them to live their lives differently.
I think that's we haven't talked about the Eucharistic procession yet, which will be coming up June 18th. But, you'll be walking down the boardwalk with the Eucharist. That idea that you just said, Jesus wants to come to us. To me, that's the perfect example of it. We're going to be walking down a boardwalk with maybe 1,000 people with the Eucharist right there.
Correct.
So was that some of the thinking that went into that? We're going to bring it.
The thing is, the National Committee for the Eucharistic Revival asked dioceses to begin the Eucharistic revival at the diocesan level on June 19th with a Eucharistic procession. We decided to do it on the vigil, because for two reasons. One, the 19th is Father's Day, so some people would not have been able to participate.
Sure.
And then also, many of our parishes already schedule their own Eucharistic processions on Corpus Christi. So we didn't want to interfere with what parishes had already planned. So we decided to have ours on the vigil. We decided to do it in candlelight because that makes it a little bit more special. But we chose to do it in Atlantic City because it's the nation's playground, and the boardwalk is infamous.
Yeah.
And what better place to make a statement that even here, where so many things that are questionable happen, with gambling and other activities that take place in Atlantic City, why not show that this is exactly where the Lord wants to be, and so to bring the Blessed Sacrament to the boardwalk and to have a procession, on the boardwalk is a public statement of our Catholic faith and a reminder. It's an evangelical moment too, because it's a reminder: A, the Church is present, and B, that the Lord wants to reach out to everyone. So whether it's people walking on the beach or eating cotton candy or riding amusements or coming out of the casino, they might take a moment to think when they see this procession go by, oh, there's more to my weekend than just this.
Right. And I think that listeners, and like Mike referenced earlier, Father Hughes and I had a conversation in the articles in the most recent Catholic Star Herald. But another point you said about Atlantic City in that article was that when you go to Atlantic City, you're distracted, just like we're distracted all the time. So here in a city that we're distracted, like we're distracted in our daily lives, we're silencing our hearts and our minds with the Eucharist on the boardwalk.
Correct. Right. Yeah, that's very,
And, to go back a little earlier to what you were talking about, I think sometimes people don't realize that the Eucharist has such an outward effect on our lives. I think a lot of times we understand the idea of consuming the Eucharist and expecting like an individual response to that. But like everything that the Catholic faith is about, going beyond the church walls, going out into the community, all of that actually emanates from the Eucharist. I mean, all of that emanates and takes it right back to the time of Christ when he moved out. So, I'm hoping that as part of this Eucharistic revival, that'll be one of the things we're able to do is to educate people on how the power of the Eucharist affects so many different things in our faith and outside of our faith. Right. Which is why apparently you had a few minutes of free time on your hand, Father Hughes, and went through and created an entire calendar of activities, not fully fleshed out, but an entire calendar of activities for us to sort of focus on in that diocesan year of the first year of the revival. So I'm curious, what are some of the things what was in your mindset as you had started to put together that calendar of ideas?
I think that we have to look at the calendar and say, what are the opportunities that the calendar itself presents, for us to celebrate the Eucharist and teach the Eucharist and live the Eucharist. As you said just a minute ago, it's about going outward. The very name of the liturgy is called the Mass, because it comes from ita missa est, which means go. Yeah. Be sent, So we come to the Mass, we prepare our hearts by listening to the Word, and then we at the offertory are supposed to join ourselves to the sacrifice that will take place. We receive the Eucharist so as to be changed in mind and heart and soul, so that we can then go forth and proclaim what we believe. So the Eucharist is, the Second Vatican Council called it the source and summit of our week, that everything should be directed towards Sunday and everything should flow from Sunday or Saturday evening if people go to Mass on Saturday evening. And, so looking at the calendar and saying, how can we emphasize the parts of the Mass, the different aspects of the Eucharist, the history of the Mass and the Eucharist. And so one of the major things that we're seeking to do is to have in both English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, monthly lectures. And for the diocesan year, we're asking the priests of the diocese, because they have a rich education and the ability to teach, to host in their own parish, but open to anybody in the diocese, various lectures on the Eucharist, so that we can deepen people's faith, but do it in the context of a short adoration experience with benediction, so that people have a time to pray, but also to learn and listen. So that's one of the events that we're one of the calendared items that we're looking at. We're also looking in October and November to have parishes spend 6 weeks teaching the people about the Mass, because it's amazing how many times you'll get, you'll be out to dinner with a family or what have you, and they'll say, why does the priest put a drop of water into the chalice, or, why do we make this, the sign of the cross on our forehead and our lips and our heart, at the proclamation of the gospel. There are things that people do, but they don't understand, or they think they understand, and it may be for a different reason altogether, So we want to spend 6 weeks looking at the various parts of the Mass, not to make it onerous in any way or to lengthen the Mass, but to provide people information in the bulletin, through social media, but then at Mass itself to really focus on what does it mean to be present at the beginning of Mass, the introductory rites. What is the liturgy of the Word about? What is the preparation of the altar and gifts about? What is the Eucharistic prayer, and why is it structured the way it is? What is the communion rite? And what's the dismissal? So to focus on those 6 parts of the Mass, and provide a bit of teaching, both in Mass, but in our religious ed programs and in our schools, so that we're hitting all age groups, hopefully, through that process, and then to culminate that with parishes making a very special effort on the Feast of Christ the King, to celebrate, the liturgy with maybe a little bit more pomp and circumstance than they ordinarily do, as a way of saying, this is why we do what we do, and then, of course, entering into Advent, immediately thereafter, to remember why Jesus came to begin with, that's how it all starts, to flow through there. And then there'll be other activities that take place during the course of the year that, as you said, are not quite fleshed out yet. I don't have the calendar in front of me, so I can't even remember some of it. But
I know we're hopefully going to end the year with a Eucharistic Congress of our own.
Correct.
The diocesan level.
Right.
That'll be a full day affair, totally focused on the Eucharist. We're looking at a big hall to have it at. Thousands of people can be there. doing it on the other side of the diocese because we are a wide diocese. So we're starting at the shore, and we're hopefully going to end that diocesan cycle for that first year on the Delaware River. And that's going to be great too. And actually, one thing that's going to sort of bleed into that is the USCCB has made available special speakers to talk
Correct.
about the Eucharist as well.
Yeah, they have Eucharistic preachers that they've been training, and so we requested one, and because we wanted to have that preacher visit our high schools and have a youth event, they're sending us a preacher who is a campus minister at a university in the United States, and he's a Dominican priest, and so the order of preachers, and they have a great affinity, obviously, for the Eucharist because of the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas. So he will be in the diocese for 4 days. He'll do events at our high schools, have a youth event on one evening, a day for priests and deacons to be renewed in their faith in the Eucharist, a day for our diocesan employees, and then an evening for the general public at large, for them to come and hear him. And then he will be featured in our Eucharistic Congress, which will be on the Feast of the Annunciation, a beautiful feast, obviously the day that Jesus was conceived, and and there'll be a whole bunch of activities that surround that day.
Yeah. And then, so that'll sort of culminate the diocesan year, and there are going to be more things than we've discussed today already. And then the parishes take over.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have now, obviously, it's far too early to know what the parishes will do, but do you have a hope of what the parishes might do?
Well, the parishes, on Corpus Christi of 23, are asked, all of them, to devise, some sort of Eucharistic procession for the Feast of Corpus Christi to initiate their own parish activities for the year. I think that some of them will have study groups on the Eucharist, and they may have, special emphasis on the children who are preparing for First Holy Communion, and involving their parents in that preparation, and things like that. They will, I'm sure, promote adoration of the Blessed Sacrament in some way, maybe more than they do currently, or at least have a solemn adoration at some point during the course of the year. And hopefully, if they do that, we'll publish that in the Star Herald, so that people who would like to make visits to other churches will be able to do so.
Absolutely.
And there's a bunch of other suggestions that we will help them with, and but again, it's up to them each individually to determine what it is that they will do. Some parishes are already meeting. It's been interesting to hear, that some parishes have already had meetings of their own Eucharistic revival planning teams. So
that's great to hear.
Yeah.
I like it when they get ahead of things.
Yeah.
That's the Camden Diocese way, Jen. I know you're not familiar with that, but
that is the way, Mike.
that is the way.
Yeah. I think the big thing right now is, we want to have a successful event on the 18th of June for the Vigil of Corpus Christi, and we've asked the parishes to each send 10, 10 people. Some pastors are saying that they're struggling a little bit to get those 10 people. Of course, it's early, and we asked for them to do it early. But we're confident that people listening to this podcast, people who read in the Star Herald, see it in their parish bulletins, hear it on KYW and the Bishop Speaks, that all those different ways will get the word out, and that we'll have a decent group of people in the procession, but probably also some watching from the sides.
Sure.
Because the procession will feature 3 stations. It's a three quarters of a mile procession, so it's not long. If we simply walked, it would take 20 minutes at most. And but there'll be 2 stops along the way. A first to celebrate in the traditions of the Asian Pacific community in the diocese. So I believe the Filipino choir is going to be singing. A group of Vietnamese will perform a dance, and there'll be a little liturgy at an altar that they prepare. Before we then move on to a second station at Michigan Avenue that will feature the Latino communities of the diocese, and again be a little liturgy that takes place at that point, and then we will move on to Kennedy Plaza, down by Convention Boardwalk Hall, and have the closing adoration, benediction, a little prayer service, and an exhortation by the bishop about the Eucharist.
Yeah. And for anybody who's interested in that, and any of our plans for the Eucharistic Revival, you can go to eucharisticrevivalsouthjersey.org. We'll have a dedicated website for all of this. And for the Eucharistic procession specifically, that's taking place at Tennessee and Boardwalk in Atlantic City at 8 p.m. So get there, half hour beforehand. We'll be giving out free battery-operated candles to everybody. Thank you to Vitality Catholic Healthcare Services for sponsoring that. But it should be a great event. We have 1,000 of them, so we're hoping to see 1,000 people there. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. You were going to ask something?
Oh, I was just going to say literally what you just said.
Oh, okay.
I want to make sure people show up where they need to be.
Yeah, exactly. So. And it goes to Kennedy. So it's not a hard walk. There's ramps to get up. It's going to be a very easy procession, like Father Hughes mentioned. It's going to be wonderful. We'll have great sound and everything like that. And if it does rain, don't worry. We got a backup plan. The idea is we will gather at St. Nicholas of Tolentine Church in Atlantic City,
which is at Tennessee and Pacific, so right. It's right off the boardwalk on the same place we're supposed to begin.
Right.
Now, if people go to the website, can they find out where they might be able to park in case there's parking issues? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll have all that information up there.
Great.
No worries.
And information about the jitneys.
I love the jitney.
People in Atlantic City, or
the
people who go to Atlantic City, you have to learn to embrace the jitney.
Yeah.
The jitney is a fabulous thing.
It is. I love the jitneys.
Yes.
I have a lot of good jitney stories.
Right. If you're not familiar with jitneys, folks, think of it as a van that takes you from one end of town to the other at a very reasonable price. And in a very reasonable experience. Yes. But it's awesome. I love it. Yeah. It was great. Did it when I was a kid, didn't when I'm now. Loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, I think, have to thank the city of Atlantic City. Mm-hmm. They have embraced this event and been very, very cooperative and helpful. We will have police protection all along the boardwalk as we process and with us as we process. Also the parish of St. Monica, which is the parish for Atlantic City. Mm-hmm. They and their communities have really come together to support the event. They're excited about the event. And so we're very grateful to Father Mohan, the other priests at St. Monica, and all the people there who have really assisted in making this come to life.
Yeah, it's really nice. Your parents going to be there?
I'm not sure. I'm sure they will be. My parents are members of the parish of St. Monica. So.
Well, if they listen, they're getting a special invitation from me. Come on over. It's going to be fun.
I believe they will be there. The only reason they wouldn't be is if they might be out of town at a graduation.
Okay.
But, yep.
Her parents live in town, so
they do.
Neighboring town anyway.
Yep.
But anyway, so that's that's what we wanted to talk about today. Is So it was a Pew survey that came out in 2019 that sort of was the genesis of all of this, in the sense that there was this great concern, and it has been shown an accurate concern about whether or not Catholics of all types, no matter who you are, to your point earlier, Father Hughes, it is a mystery, the Eucharist. Many elements of it are mysterious, rather, I guess maybe the better way of putting it. But that people think they know what they know, and so many of them don't. And I feel like when Catholic school kids are learning, or if they're learning in their parishes, getting catechized as kids, we do a fairly good job with that. But once we graduate, once you hit 18 and they're that part out, unless you choose to become of like a small prayer group or something like that, I think it ends up missing the boat, and we just take everything for granted. Do you think that this process might help us, not necessarily in our diocese, but across the United States, do a better job of interacting with adults, Catholic adults, helping to make sure that they're reminded of our faith? It's so easy to forget it.
It's not just to forget it. I think it's better with the way you said it, to take it for granted. Okay. It's not that we forget our faith. At important moments, people show up.
Yeah, true.
After 9/11, our churches were filled. Yeah. And then once we get further away from whatever the disaster was or the difficulty is, we go back to our regular patterns, and we know it's there, but we don't really think we need it at that moment. And I do think that the Eucharistic Revival will highlight the importance of the Eucharist and hopefully bring that to consciousness, because that's what it's about, being aware that that we have this beautiful gift that the Lord gives us, that He wants us to have, that He knows will help us tremendously if we simply take advantage of it, and so hopefully that will happen. I think that it's really important for Catholics who believe and practice, to realize that priests and bishops can't do it alone. That one of the things that I think the Holy Father is trying to teach us is the need to accompany one another in the faith. So when parents encourage their adult children, and their grandchildren to practice the faith, that's an important thing. When they make the invitation without haranguing, to them, and when they set the example. Most importantly, I tell people all the time, you don't realize that on Sunday morning when you get up and you get dressed and people see you get into your car at the same time every week, that you are evangelizing. Because for a moment they have to think, why is that person choosing to go to church, or that family choosing to go to church? And I think we have to do a better job of inviting people to our faith. I've been an advocate of saying, well, on Pentecost we should order bulletins, in excess, and everybody take a bulletin and bring it to your next door neighbor. And just have a short little conversation to say, here's information about our church, and I'd love to share the experience. That's what happens in other churches. They're very intentional about helping the regular people who come to church, the parishioners, become the evangelists. And it's high time for the Catholic Church to embrace that. It's not, there's a very, very significant dimension of our faith that is personal. There's no doubt about it, and individual. But it's not just individual and personal. It's supposed to impact our lives and the lives of those around us. So, in the Acts of the Apostles we just heard earlier in the Easter season, that the Christians were recognized for the way that they lived their lives. And because they were recognized for the way that they lived their lives, people chose to join them. And so the reality is Catholics need to be recognized for what they believe and how they conduct themselves, so that others will see that and ask questions like, what is so important about this? Being able to answer that question might change the life of another person. And that is the level at which it has to happen. With the internet and with everything, the information is there. It's a matter of taking the time to read it and to be willing to share it. But more importantly, participating in the Eucharist themselves, and taking time to pray makes all the difference. I don't think we make anywhere near enough time for God in our lives, because of the distractions that the world holds for us. And that it's a necessary thing.
I think what you just said is absolutely key between the prayer and how, as Catholics, we need to be recognized for what we believe and how we conduct ourselves. Because, I know I can speak for myself. I like to say, oh, I'm doing this on the weekend, I'm big into social justice, and then but if I don't know what I believe, if I don't understand the Eucharist, that's where it's all stemming from. So how can I have one without the other?
Right. Yeah.
So I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, I will also get some more understanding of the Eucharist.
Well, I guarantee you that's going to be happening, because we're going to be writing a ton of articles. So through that effort alone, we are going to become very wise about the Eucharist. Though I think to a larger point, when it comes to our faith, I've often said on this podcast that it was the small groups that I was in, not a formal small group, but surrounded by community members, Catholics, priests, friends that I was friendly with. That's redundant. That I knew that really kind of when I was at that time period of my life, my early 20s, when I could have easily gone in the other direction. The fact that I had that crew of people to be there and help me sort of understand my role in the world and how faith, can be a part of that. That's really stuck with me for 25 years through multiple jobs and, all the ups and downs of a married man and a father and stuff like that. And those are the things I remember back. So I hope this process will generate some of that will take us away from that individualistic feeling that we Americans excel at.
Yeah.
To your point.
Well, and I think there's two other things too. One of the reasons people give for not coming to church is that they don't get anything out of it. And and that's a typical modern American approach to things. I will invest in the things that give me something back. And the reality is, Mass is one of the things that we're supposed to give to. Yeah. It's not about getting, it's about giving.
Right.
So as I was saying earlier, that when we come with our needs and we recognize and know our needs, so the person that is diagnosed with cancer, they make a special effort to get to church because they have a need that they want to pray about and they want the Lord to hear. So they make the extra effort to get to church. The person who's grieving, the same thing. The person who is trying to see a different road for a loved one, they go on behalf because they want to offer themselves, and this situation to the Lord, and that's again the symbolism of the offertory procession, the bread and the wine, and the monetary collection, which some people get upset about. Money represents us. Money is our power. Money defines us. And, so the offering of money, for the work of the church and to build up and help the community, is important. But the bread and wine represent us as the food that we eat. So we offer bread that is made by human hands, wine that is made by human hands, so they represent humanity. We offer them at the altar, and through the mystery of the Eucharist and the celebration and the power of God, he gives himself back to us. He gives himself to us, so that he becomes our food, so that we can become more like him. So we do get something from Mass,
sure,
but it may not be a fantastic homily. It may not be fantastic music. It may not even be a fantastic environment. But the point is that we're supposed to go there to make a sacrifice of our time. 45 minutes a week is it's not a huge sacrifice. We do plenty of things, that take longer than that, but to make a sacrifice of our time, a sacrifice of ourselves in the money that we offer, but also the sacrifice of saying to the Lord, I want to hand myself over to you for these reasons or for these needs. And as I said, he gives himself back to us, and it's the most beautiful gift that we can receive. Many of the criticisms throughout history have been that the Mass is some sort of magic, experience. That even, Protestants, when after the Reformation, would make fun of the Mass and call it hocus pocus, because hoc est is part of the Latin words of the consecration. And so, they would make fun of it and say that, Catholics go because, some magical thing happens. It's not, there's no magic to it whatsoever. Jesus in the scriptures tells us, and every Christian church proclaims these words: this is my body. Mm-hmm. This is my blood. All we have to do is believe him.
Yeah.
Mm.
You don't have to believe anybody else. Believe what the Lord says. And there's your answer. This is my body, this is my blood. And I give myself to you because I love you and I want you to be, with me for all eternity.
Is it wrong that I'm going to take out of this episode that we found out that hocus pocus came from the Reformation? Because in my entire life I never knew that, right, and now I'm fascinated by that. Right. That's where it comes from.
You can look it up.
Mm-hmm. I believe you. I'm amazed it took 53 minutes to get there, but I'm so happy that I know that now. Don't worry, the other part's important too, but that's the story I'm going to tell everybody today what I learned.
And I was sitting here thinking, we should have Father Hughes do his own podcast once a week, because I feel like I learned so much just now.
No, the problem is my brain was churning in the same direction, but the hard part's getting him to do it, because he's a very busy man. That's the problem.
Very, very
Does not have a lot of time. He's been on I've been doing this podcast now for 5 years. He's been on 3 times, maybe only twice. I think it's 3 times.
That's the only times you've asked.
I know you've always said yes. I got news for you. He's very. Hey, listen, you've been on 3 times more than the bishop. I'm starting to feel bad about that, but that may happen. Well, anyway, this has been outstanding. I do hope that our listeners will share this podcast with people who may not understand what the Eucharist is, and more importantly, share with their friends and their neighbors that the Eucharistic revival is going on. You can certainly check out our website, but it's a national revival, so there will be websites and initiatives in every diocese of the country, and certainly the USCCB will be taking a lot as well, proclaiming a lot, putting a lot of information out there. So I do hope that you'll avail yourself of whatever sort of speaks to you. We know you won't be into everything, but definitely if you prefer to see it written, read them. If you prefer to watch it, watch it. If you prefer to listen to it, I'll make a whole podcast series just for this, just for you. But let us know what you want to hear too, and it'll be. I promise you, it'll be a great experience, and it'll actually help you to be a better Catholic by knowing more about your faith. Anyway, everybody, thank you very much, Father Hughes, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Jen, as always, thank you, and to our listeners, we'll talk to you again next week. See you, everybody.